Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural, homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 55, and today I'm here with Sarah Moore talking about sensitive kids. Sarah is the founder of Dandelion Seeds Positive Parenting. As a certified gentle parenting coach, she's a regular contributor to international parenting magazines, as well as an eternal optimist and recovering perfectionist. She's currently writing 2 books that will be released later this year. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. Our recent adventure was that we spent a few days skiing and snowboarding up in the mountains, and it was glorious. When it comes to hiking with kids, you've heard me talk about having the intention to just be here together, not to reach a destination or cover a particular distance, just to be here together, and whatever that ends up looking like is success. The same goes for bigger activities like skiing and snowboarding. The greater the financial and planning investment, the more pressure we can feel for an outcome-oriented goal to define success. But that is a formula for feelings of stress and failure. Instead, just be here together, on the slope with the gear. That is the goal, and that is the bar for success. Whoa, does that free everyone up. Playful, natural learning flourishes. Day 1 was spent sliding around on the buddy slope, playing with snowboarding. By day 2, my youngest was cruising the bump track on his way down from the top of the mountain. Any moments of fear or frustration, and we pause and connect with some patient reassurance. We have all the time in the world, and we're right here with you. Slowing down is the secret to how our family goes so far, so fast. Our little obsession right now is the new bucket system class. Oh my goodness, you all are loving it. The bucket system is now a full online course with 50 lessons that include videos, audio, text, photos, worksheets, discussions, and quizzes that give you the soft structure you need to support home care, self-care, and homeschooling with all the connection and collaboration, freedom and independence you are used to vibing on here. Katie Webb says, "My house has not been this peaceful and productive in ages. I could cry. Best money I ever spent." If you want to bring the bucket system into your home, go to sagefamily.com/bucket-system, and I'll have a link for you in the show notes as well. I also have to let you know that the website has changed over from rachelrainbolt.com to sagefamily.com per your requests. All of the pages you've bookmarked and been loving will forward you automatically to where you want to go, but I wanted to make you aware of the switch. If you want to see photos and videos of our trip or the bucket system in action, then head on over to sage.family on Instagram and follow along. Interviewed me for her Dandelion Seed program, and I enjoyed the conversation so much that I invited her onto the Sage Family podcast. She's here today to share a conversation on sensitive kids. So welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel. I'm glad to be here.
Will you introduce yourself and share a little bit about who you are and what you're passionate about and how you came to this work?
Absolutely. I'll even do it with interpretive dance because since there's no video, people can just imagine what I might be doing here. Let's see. Well, as you mentioned, I'm the founder of Dandelion Seeds Positive Parenting. When the world is normal, if there ever is such a thing, we are a world schooling family. So we essentially do a combination of heavily focused unschooling along with real world living and learning from travel. So that's our passion.
Awesome.
I am a published writer in all sorts of fun magazines that I liked and followed long before I ever wrote for them. I've got 2 books in progress, and I just really advocate kindness and gentle, good treatment of others, starting with the smallest others that we know in life.
I love that. All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about sensitive kids, which is a topic that I get asked about a lot. So I'm excited to have this conversation. First, I want to touch on the neurodiversity piece. So how can we help them know that this way of being is a gift and a strength, even though it brings with it some challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. 2 major ideas come to mind for me. One is it's really important from a very, very young age to start instilling in children the fact that there are 2 sides to every coin. For example, if you have a sensitive child who is really in tune with, as is often the case, picking up what others are feeling. So, for example, if they're at the playground and some other child they've never even met falls down and starts to cry, your child may start to cry just because it's hard for them to see another child suffer. So, it's in this child's example, they might know, wow, I'm really sensitive to other people's feelings, and sometimes that's hard. But look how we can reframe that. This child can walk into a room and pick up the vibe so easily and be able to know, who am I more likely to get along with? Who looks like there's somebody who I want to hang out with or spend time with? How can I use this to my advantage in creating a life that feels peaceful and positive to me? So, helping kids understand that something that can feel tricky to them can also be a great source of strength in life, not only now when they're little, but also as they continue to grow up. And talking openly about that is a really, really powerful thing for kids. Along with that is my second tip, if you will, is that it's really, really helpful if we can teach our kids not to judge. So, for example, that includes, of course, judging themselves. We might hear about our child, for example, particularly if they are introverted, or one of my least favorite words on the planet, shy, as some people call it. If they are perceived as being shy, we can talk about what are some strengths of introversion? What enables you to be a stronger, more competent human because you take the time to observe before you jump into situations. Help kids see in action the benefit to being this way. So, continuing the example for a second, if you have a kid who is not the first one to jump into the pit of plastic balls or, fly down the slide head first or whatever the case may be, we can talk about with our child, what are some advantages to that? Well, let's see. Number one, you might get fewer owies than your friends. Number two, you might see, does it even look like something I want to do based on watching other kids go first? There are lots and lots of benefits to this perception and the self-perception that perhaps we are the one that likes to hang back rather than jump in. So anytime we are tempted to think of one of our qualities, being the child, or one of our children's qualities, being the parent, as a negative, we can reframe it as a positive, thereby reducing judgment and really help these kids learn to accept themselves for who they beautifully are from a very, very young age so that they grow up feeling like, yeah, I may or may not be like my friends or like these other kids that I see over here, but I like myself anyway because I don't judge myself harshly. I just like me and I like being around me.
Yes, I love all of that you just said. For the people who are listening who have listened to the neurodiversity episode of this podcast, and if you haven't, this is a good time to like pause and go back and listen to that and then come back and listen to this, because we did talk a lot about this and you sort of reiterated it, but specifically through the lens of sensitive kids in such a beautiful way that in any given society, in order for it to be successful, there needed to be a diversity of ways of being. So a kid who has ADHD might be the risk taker, the explorer, the adventurer, the one who, when the food runs out, they trudge off into a new part of the jungle, sword in hand, looking for a new food source, right? And then we also need these sensitive people who bring all of these strengths with them. And I will say that sensitivity is my superpower, for sure. I was a sensitive child, and it is what is at the core of all of my work that you consume. So this podcast that you listen to, the writing that I put out there, that this huge part of who I am is a sensitive person, and it allows me to do all of the things that I do. It touches everything that I do is sort of touched and informed by that piece of who I am.
I love that, Rachel. And you're talking to a kindred spirit here. I mean, I was raised by one, I was one and am one myself, and I'm raising one of my own right now. So, like you, I had the life experience to say, yeah, this really does seem to be a thing. And next thing you know, you do some research about it and you figure out there's actual neuroscience behind this, and we are wired this way. We are hardwired this way. And there must be a reason for that. Like, this must be a biological imperative for the planet to continue.
Yes.
So there are great gifts here.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's important to touch on what you said too about how there are two sides to each coin. And there are two pieces to helping our kids with accepting and celebrating their way of being. One is the validation that there are it's hard to be a person in the world, and each person has a different way that it's hard to be them in the world, right? So validating, like, yes, this aspect of being a person in the world is hard for you, and the flip side of that way of being, like that exact thing that you're having that feels hard for you right now in this moment and in this context, is a strength in what other contexts? Like how can this serve you? How is this helpful? How does this benefit the world? How does this benefit the people around you? How does this, how is this a superpower too? So like just being able to hold space for both sides of that coin is important.
Exactly. Yeah. You've given me goosebumps. I love the way you think about it, Rachel.
Thank you. Okay, why is it especially important to be able to read your sensitive child's cues?
Oh, that is such a great question. I love it. So, first of all, what we know from neuroscience, this is not just Mama Sarah talking here. This is researcher Sarah, who understands a little bit of the neuroscience behind it. We know some things about sensitive kids. For example, we know that areas of their brain actually do have bigger reactions that can be measured by MRIs when they are exposed to the same stimulus as the child next to them who might not be as sensitive. So the reactions really are different on the inside. And because they are having sometimes bigger reactions internally, we know that their likelihood to go into fight, flight, or freeze mode is heightened. They are going to be super hyper aware of their surroundings. And if they see something that they perceive either consciously or subconsciously as a threat, their bodies will react accordingly. Now, particularly for younger kids, many of them, and heck, many adults for that matter, their bodies react first before their conscious minds catch up with them. So we might, as the adult, look at their cues and see, I notice that my child seems to be freezing here, as an example. The child might not even realize yet that he or she is feeling overwhelmed, but we can see in our child that they are starting to have a physiological response that something's going on in their environment that's making them uncomfortable. We then, as the adult, can intervene if need be. For example, we can help the child, and this is great for building executive function skills, we can help the child notice what's going in their body. So for example, if we see our child freezing up, we can crouch down next to our child and say something to them like, I'm noticing your body is really still right now, or you have a look on your face that tells me you might be feeling worried about this, or whatever it is that we perceive happening to our child, which helps our child check in with their own body and bring whatever's happening subconsciously up to the conscious level. From there, we can say things that, again, help executive function skills like, I'm wondering what you're feeling right now. And labeling feelings is, of course, part of emotion coaching and helping the child to identify, oh, yeah, I'm feeling scared, or I'm feeling mad, or I'm feeling whatever it is, fill in the blank. It might be I'm feeling super surprised and excited. Could be a happy thing, too. We can help children get more in touch with their bodies and then co-regulate alongside them and help them determine the best course of action, whatever the scenario may be. So, for example, if they are at a playground and a ball just came whizzing past their head, and instead of reaching out to grab it, they froze, and all of a sudden they've got a mob of children coming their way, we can say to them, hey, look, I see a lot of kids are running this way, and basically coach them through that experience. At the same time, we have to be careful not to superimpose our own experience upon the child, especially if we ourselves are sensitive. So it's really important to check in with the child and see what's going on for them, but reading their cues and knowing what's typically grounding for them, what's typically connecting to them, knowing whether, based on what we observe in them, whether they need some sort of emotional or physical support in that moment versus, all right, it looks like they're surprised, but I can also tell that they've got this under control. So I, as a parent, can step back and give them the opportunity to grow through experience and see if they can handle this on their own, whatever it might be. So we have to, as the adult, read the child, because the child, particularly a highly sensitive one, might not yet know how to read themselves. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. The word attunement is my favorite word whenever we're talking about cues and sensitive kids. I mean, really the like number one action-oriented or like energetic job, I feel like, of the parent of a sensitive child is to be attuned, which is like to be literate in the very subtle cue language of your child. Because that is really where you can do so much for them in terms of all of the things that you just described, like helping them understand the emotional experience, sort of narrating the things that are happening in their body. Like that's all of that happens by you being able to read those subtle cues. So for many years, I taught baby massage classes and I loved it. I did it when I had babies of my own, so they would be my little demo babies. And I know a lot of the members of the Sage family community are from like way back then in the baby massage days. But part of why I did that, I mean, the big like main course of that class was not so much massage itself, but that massage was like the vehicle for attachment or for connection, in that it was all about learning to read those very subtle cues that your baby is giving you. So even before they have words, before they have a lot of motor control, as you're sitting there face to face with your baby, touching their bodies, asking permission, looking for cues as to whether they like the touch, how they like their touch, like where they like, all of those kinds of things. That is the work of like becoming literate in the language of your baby, and that can carry through for the long haul. So if you find that maybe you haven't done that, you haven't been incredibly attuned, and here you are, your kid is 5, 8, 10, whatever, 12, 15, and you want to get tuned back into their language, I just want to say that you always can. Start taking notes, start noticing the subtle cues that your child is, that you're seeing, that you're hearing, that you're sensing, that you're feeling, all of that in your kids. You can even like journal it, like if you're really trying to get in tune with it, trying to look at their hands, look at like the small muscles in their face, notice their breathing, like all of those kinds of really subtle cues can help tune you into what's happening in your kid before there's a quote unquote problem, right? Before their system is overloaded.
I love that. Yeah. And I particularly love that for the parents who perhaps are not wired to be as sensitive as their children, because those are some really actionable things that anybody can do if they just know kind of what the checklist is. And you touched on that beautifully. So yeah, I love that, Rachel.
Yeah. And then, I mean, you can take it to the next step and collaborate with them once you feel like you have a good handle on what those cues are. So you might be able to sit down with them and say, like, I've noticed when you're just about to be overloaded by the energy in a crowded space, like your fists start to clench. Like I start to see a lot of tension in your hands. Is there something that I can do for you in that moment that would help you to feel more safe, or that would remind you that you can take a break, or that we can take a break outside? Or, you sort of ask them those questions, like, what can I do as an ally to help you in that moment? Again, like before there's a problem, right? Like before it turns into a tantrum, or before, because then it's a different ball game. You're kind of cleaning up after the overload. Whereas if we can like get in connection and be allies and partners with our kids with those subtle cues, and if we can collaborate proactively outside of those hard moments, it can be game changing, which brings us into discipline. What style of discipline works well with a sensitive child?
This is another brilliant question. I just love this conversation. Let's see. Well, I typically think of it in terms of what I call the 4 Ps. Number 1 is be present with the child in the moment, not only physically and emotionally present, but also hearkening back to the cues we were talking about a couple of minutes ago. Present in knowing that there's not any one discipline style that will work for every single moment. So within being present, what I'm really getting to is be flexible. Read the cues, read the child. Does the child look like they need co-regulation right now? Does it look like they need quiet or a quick story time? Does it look like they need to use some proprioceptive tools like giving themselves a hug or doing some belly breathing? Really being present and seeing what's going on right now and what would help my child most right this second, without worrying about how are they going to learn from this experience, or what's it going to look like 10 minutes from now. With a sensitive child in particular, knowing that their nervous system will lead the way, check in with what they need right this second, and that will guide all the rest of what you do. Number 2 is be proactive. You were talking about this just a second ago. It is certainly much easier to problem solve proactively than retroactively. So if, for example, because you have charted that every day about 30 minutes before dinner time, your child has this massive, explosive emotional release. I actually prefer not to call it tantrum, because tantrum has such a loaded negative connotation, whereas an emotional release can be a very healthy thing. Not to say it's easy, because we all know it can be really, really tricky. But if we have noticed that our child always has this big release 30 minutes before dinner time, we can be proactive, because more than likely it's related to blood sugar, or it's related to, gosh, it's the end of the day and they've had so many sensory inputs all day that maybe rather than, you know, blaring music and having high activity before dinner time, maybe we need quiet time before dinner time. But if we can notice what our child's triggers typically are, we can address a lot of them proactively. That also rings true for situations that haven't even happened yet. So, for example, if you know that your child typically is not a big fan of large groups, maybe back in the day when we could get together with lots of people, your child didn't like going to the mall, didn't like going to restaurants, it was just too busy and noisy. Well, if they have a birthday party coming up and they have never been to a birthday party, you might want to either, if it's somebody else's birthday party and you can't control how many kids are going to be there, you might want to role play with the child. You might want to practice it. You might talk about what it's going to be like and what they can experience and how they can find peace and calm within what they might perceive to be a chaotic situation. So proactive discipline, always in the sense of teaching, is incredibly helpful. One way to do that is my third P, which is to be playful. Playful parenting we can talk about in its own right, because it can warrant its other whole discussion in and of itself. But being playful and deciding, well, let's see, do I want to be, dictator mama, where from across the house I start bellowing, put on your shoes, we're running late for school, that's pretty much never going to go over well with a sensitive child, or most children for that matter. But if we can say, all right, I've got a scavenger hunt for the morning, and I need everybody to find 2 pairs of shoes. Can everybody find 2 pairs of shoes? And next thing you know, you're having some fun with it. You have just eliminated one source of conflict from the day. And of course, going back to the nervous system, the more we can keep our kids in their parasympathetic nervous system, where they are calm and regulated, the less heightened arousal they need to have, and therefore the less time they will spend in fight, flight, or freeze. So if we can be playful, if we can have fun, if we can add novelty and levity to our days, that will decrease the amount of conflict we have with our kids, and therefore we will have less correcting to do, because we're already connected, we're already collaborating well together. And my last P, if you will, is peaceful. All discipline for sensitive children and not sensitive children should be peaceful. It should always come from a place of win-win collaboration versus any sort of power struggles or any sort of authoritarian, I'm the adult and therefore you should language. If we can be peaceful and find ways to connect with our children and teach through nonviolent communication, which again is a topic in and of itself, but we can teach through storytelling proactively and peacefully. In fact, I've got a whole separate book coming about the power of stories and peaceful parenting. But we can be peaceful in our approach, because the more peace we bring to the relationship with the sensitive child, the better everybody will get along, the more we will foster cooperation naturally, and in a nutshell, the happier our lives will be, and the less correcting we'll need to do in the first place.
The gentle parenting that you all have heard me talk about for the last 12 years, like connection, collaboration, all that stuff. I mean, that's the kind of discipline that works well with a sensitive kid, which is all the kinds of things that Sarah is describing here. Sensitive children are just less resilient, I would say, against the damaging effects of mainstream discipline. So, like, all of this gentle parenting, peaceful parenting stuff that you can hear throughout virtually every episode of this podcast, works so well for sensitive kids, like so well. And you can even kind of like turn the volume down on it a little bit more. Whereas those mainstream discipline techniques, there are certain ways of being for whom they can be somewhat naturally resilient to it. Like you'll hear people say like, oh, well, I was raised that way and I'm fine, right? I mean, I could spend an entire episode breaking down the problem with that argument, but let's just throw it out there for a second here. Not everybody is going to be fine coming out of that. And I would say that sensitive children especially are one of those ways of being that are particularly damaged by mainstream discipline. So just how can you discipline sensitive kids? Like all of the things that you've heard me talk about for the last 12 years, like do all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Rachel, to your point too, especially when we look at the nervous system of the sensitive child, we know that it takes less stimulus to achieve the same result as other children. A little goes a long way here. So it is entirely possible that for a sensitive child, if we so much, and believe me, I know about this because my own child calls me on it sometimes, if we so much get a bit of tone in our voice, a bit of frustration coming through our teeth as we grit them, that can be perceived by a sensitive child the same way that another child might perceive this yelling parent who's over the top freaking out.
Yeah.
Because it's the nervous system. A little goes a long, long way for these sensitive kids.
Yeah. And when you are highly attuned with your child, I mean, that's a connection and it goes both ways. So your child tends to be highly attuned to you as well. And that includes like all of those subtle cues, which can be a tremendous asset. It also means you have, to a certain extent, a greater responsibility to be doing that work of reparenting yourself and being mindful and regulating your own emotional state and being intentional with your words and your behaviors, showing up, as the person that you want to show up in the world is especially important when you have a sensitive child, because it's like their filter, especially if you have a really attuned connection, like that filter is so thin between the two of you that they're really sensitive to all of those subtle cues from you as well.
Yeah, for sure. And you just touched on something else beautiful. Not only, I think, as part of attunement, I'll throw out another A word to consider: authenticity. Because sensitive kids, like no other, are going to be able to see right through it if we are not being authentic. So yeah, we have to reparent ourselves. Yeah, we have to make sure that we're not just saying the words. The whole vibe, the whole tone, the whole energy that we put forth to our sensitive child is going to be picked up on. So it can come across like, oh my goodness, this is so much pressure. How will I ever get it right? Well, you will. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of introspection. But the more peaceful you can be down in your gut, down in your belly, as your default with your child will also pick up on that. And if you're having a day where you didn't get enough sleep, you're not well nourished, you're just not feeling it, best thing you can possibly do in those moments is be authentic with your child and say, I'm struggling today. I'm doing the best I can, but today's kind of hard for me. So please give me some grace as I work to do as well as I possibly can. If you hear tone coming out of my mouth, please know it's not intentional. I love you. I always will. And, it's my responsibility to take care of myself, and feel free to call me on it if you see me acting in a way that doesn't feel appropriate for you or whatever it is. Obviously, we don't want to put the onus on the child to take care of us, but I believe it's really important to be authentic in what we're bringing to the table any given day, and just telling our kids we're doing our best, or today's a great day. I'm, going to do the best I can with you today too, because today I feel like I've got it down. We're going to be all right today.
Yeah, authenticity is so important with sensitive kids because they know when you're not being authentic and sincere, and it makes them work so much harder. Kids who aren't super sensitive might just sort of accept a mask that you put on, whereas sensitive kids will kind of spin trying to understand what's really going on beneath the surface. So if we can be overt about it and honest about it, definitely that's going to be a helpful approach.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into that playfulness some more. So how is playfulness extra helpful with a sensitive child?
It's extra helpful in two ways. First of all, it really takes the pressure off. If we know that we can handle a lot of this parenting thing with playfulness, we don't feel like we have to wear this, old-fashioned authoritarian hat where we say, all right, how am I supposed to be in charge today? Because you know what? That's a lot of pressure for us. And it's a lot of pressure on our kids too, because they feel like we're going to be holding them to expectations they can't possibly meet and all these other tricky things that we just don't want to have to deal with. So if we can take the pressure off both ourselves and our kids, it's going to be a happier existence together. Secondly, as I alluded to before, if we know that playfulness is just more fun for everybody, it's like this wonderful snowball that just keeps building on itself. If we start the day playfully and do things that are connecting rather than dividing with our children, we will connect in a way that feels like this is just going to be fun. We're going to enjoy each other's company. We are going to feel like we can do this together because, something I love, when we are playful with our kids are playful back with us. So I'll share a funny example. There was a time not that long ago where I went downstairs and my child had made what most adults would perceive to be a colossal mess. She had toys all over the living room, like there was hardly even walking room. So I went downstairs and I was in adult brain, I confess. And I went downstairs and I said, I don't even know how to get through this room. We need to clean some of this up. And my daughter looked at me and she said, Mama, I have an idea. Rather than judging this and thinking of my toys as a mess, why don't you pretend you're driving and these are a bunch of roundabouts and you get to practice driving around the roundabouts? And I loved it because she was able to lighten the mood. I was able to go, oh yeah, I have a child here, not just a shorter adult. I need to think like she does. And then we got to have fun with it. And sure enough, we got everything clean to the point where it wasn't, like a life and death hazard walking through the living room. But we got to enjoy the process of being together. And, to my credit, but much more than that, to the credit of the people who taught me how to do it in the first place, if we train our kids in the sense of discipline to think playfully because we have led the way, it's a much easier, much more fun existence together. And I know that she came up with that because I have talked about driving around things before or using her toys as cars to drive them back into the toy box or whatever it is. So, I'm being long-winded here, but the short version of this is we can have a whole lot more fun when everybody's stress levels are down. It's just an easier life. And isn't that what we all really want?
Yes, an easier life, a more fun life. Absolutely. I think too, playfulness, sensitive kids can be sensitive, especially to a sense of rejection or failure or disapproval. And if we can hold some of our boundaries or deliver some of our requests with playfulness, it can really disarm that defensiveness and hurt that might otherwise be triggered, especially in a sensitive kid. So like I have a coaching client who has a child who's very physical, and she doesn't always want to be touched in the way that her daughter likes to touch. And so she was asking, like, if I just don't want to be touched, like, what do I do? What can I say? And I suggested she say something like, her daughter would say, I love you, Mom. I want to give you a big cuddle. And I suggested she try saying something like, Oh, I love you too, baby. My body doesn't want to be touched right now, but can you show me your love with a dance? Oh, I would love to see a love dance, Or, oh, I love you too, baby. My body doesn't want to be touched right now, but can you show me how much you love me in a jump? Like the higher you jump, the more you love me. I'll be able to see it. So like ways of being playful with sensitive kids, particularly at times where they might be especially sensitive to feeling like rejected or disapproved of, things like that, I think can be a tremendous benefit, like a really powerful tool to have in your parenting toolbox.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And especially if a child is already feeling dysregulated. So I'm thinking of an example of a child who I saw once who was picking up a brick, I mean, like an actual hard brick, and swinging it around in his hands. And he was swinging it towards kids. And I knew, because I knew the child and I knew what he was processing, he had recently been criticized and corrected for something. And he had internalized that criticism, and now he was looking for an outlet. So he picked up this brick and he started swinging it around. And I thought in that moment, the last thing he needs is more correction in a way that's going to make him feel worse, because it was feeling poorly in the first place that got us to this point. So I kind of jumped over, and rather than addressing him, I addressed the brick. And I said, "Excuse me, brick, I have something urgent I need to tell you. Calling all bricks, listen up." And it caught the little boy's attention. And he paused for a second and he held the brick toward me as if the brick were listening. Said, "Brick, I need your help. We need to build some things. We know that we can cause owies if we're swinging around." So herein is the teaching for the child. I know we can create owies, and we don't want to create owies, but we do need to build the tallest wall we can possibly build. We have a wall emergency. And next thing you know, this little boy was like stacking that brick, and he was looking for anything else he could stack up. But it was still a way for him to be physical with the object without needing to take out any of his classmates in the process. So you can use playfulness even in the heat of the moment as a backup if straight out connection isn't going to work. I did not have any inclination in my body to approach a child who was swinging a brick and say, "Do you need a hug?" Because I'm pretty sure the brick would have ended up in the side of my head. But to be able to approach him in the quote unquote language that he was speaking in that moment was really powerful. And it was solely based on play and speaking the language that he was speaking in that moment.
What type of language have you found resonates with sensitive children?
Ooh, good question. Well, continuing what we were saying a second ago, certainly nothing critical. I'll talk about what it isn't as well as what it is. Nothing critical, nothing condescending, nothing that comes across as sounding holier than thou. None of this, I know because I'm the adult and you're doing it wrong, and here's why that's bad. Like, certainly anything that has the words bad or wrong or naughty or anything that's blaming, shaming, or in other terms punitive has no place with a sensitive child. Conversely, what works extremely well for positive children is positive language, or for sensitive children is positive language. So, for example, if a child is being too rough, you can say, instead of, "Stop being rough, you're going to hurt someone," you can say, "Please be gentle." Tell the child what to do instead. "Please pat the cat nicely. Please ask your brother before you touch his body. Remember to do this, that, or the other thing." Tell them what they can do. On top of that, and this is actually something I learned many years ago in executive negotiation class, long before I was a parent or even in the parenting business, so to speak. But when I was back in corporate America and taking an executive negotiation class, I learned how to turn virtually any no into a yes. So, for example, it would be really disheartening for a child who's walking towards a playground to ask, hey, can we go to the playground? And have the adult's response be, no, we're on our way to the post office, period. You know, insert the womp 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 music from like whatever 1970s show you can think of here. It's like, that's really just discouraging. Let's give the child some hope, give them something to hold on to, particularly for children who are sensitive. As we talked about neurologically, their brains are going to take a little bit of input and process it as if it were much bigger than what it is at face value. So if you are walking down the street with your child toward the playground and you know that you really only have time to pass the playground to get to the post office so you can get to your next thing on time, you can be proactive and you can say to your child, hey, I want to let you know we're about to pass the playground and we don't have time to stop there today, but let's make sure to wave to the swings as we walk past, and we'll tell them that we're planning to see them tomorrow. That works really well, for example, for a little kid. If it's an older kid, and let's say perhaps you don't know that the playground is coming up and all of a sudden, oops, it's right in front of you, and now you're feeling like, oh, how do I cram all this into our day? We really don't have time. You can still turn that into a yes. You can, if your child says, can we go to the playground? Rather than, no, we're going to the post office, you can say, while we don't have time for that today, why don't we make a plan to come back tomorrow or Saturday or whenever it works for you? You can apply that concept to pretty much anything. Talk about when the child can do whatever it is. Talk about if it's always going to be a no, give them an alternative. While we can't do that, here's what we can do instead. And the beauty of this is that it starts from a really young age, and some of it we can do quite naturally. So for example, and unfortunately, I know this one from example too, from real life example. When my daughter was 2 and we moved into a brand new house, I had never even looked at the stove that was in this rental house that we were moving into. And she walked over and she turned a knob. And what do you know? It was a gas stove. My 2-year-old turned on a gas stove. Well, that was exciting. That was a life lesson for me as a mama. But I caught myself saying, let's turn off the fire, sweetheart. Good parenting advice, right? Let's turn off the fire, sweetheart, but let's find a knob that you can twist. It's like we naturally find alternatives when our kids are little, but sometimes we forget that giving kids alternatives still works when kids get bigger. So you might have a middle schooler who says, I want to stay on my device all night tonight. I don't want to turn it off at 10 o'clock or 8 o'clock or 6 o'clock like you usually say I have to. I want to be on it all night. That might be a forever no for you, but you can say, well, devices still need to be off at X time, whatever it is, but let's come up with an idea of something else you would enjoy doing between that time and the time you go to bed. Let's brainstorm together. And you can collaborate with the child to figure out how can that no turn into a yes that is mutually acceptable, because no matter how old the child gets, there will always be something that's mutually acceptable. And you can use positive language to help the child feel empowered, help the child feel hopeful and encouraged, because that is the self-talk that they will need to learn so they can say it to themselves as they become a sensitive adult down the road.
Yes, so positive language. I agree with a lot of that finding. The quality, yes. I think sensitive kids too really benefit from a lot of feeling language, because they really experience the world so much on an emotional plane. They're sort of picking up the emotions of others. They can get easily overwhelmed by the emotions within themselves. So that, from my experience, tends to be a more prominent part of the everyday language that you're using with sensitive kids than it is with kids who are not. And of course, it's good to use positive language and to find the quality yes, and to help kids to understand their inner emotional world. All kids, but especially with sensitive kids, it feels just as imperative as making sure they have water. It feels like absolutely necessary for them to thrive, like an essential component to the recipe.
Yes, yes, yes. If there's one thing a sensitive child needs every single day of their life, it's emotion coaching. Because even as an adult, I mean, I'm in my mid to upper 40s and I still emotion coach myself through various situations all day, every day. We have to check in with ourselves. We have to realize, are we regulated? Are we happy? Are we feeling calm, peaceful? Are we breathing into our belly rather than into our chest, whatever the case may be? So from the time our kids are little all the way through, we can be reading books and talk about what's this character feeling? How can you tell? Even if it's not said in the book, you can talk about it. When you're out for a walk, you can look at the people you pass and say, right now we're just reading eyes because there are all these masks covering faces. But, what does it look like that person's feeling right now? I wonder why. If somebody's grouchy, I wonder what could be going on for them. This needs to be an ongoing discussion because sensitive kids are going to need to be able to do it every day of their lives.
Yeah, I think water has been a really helpful metaphor for me in working with, well, understanding myself and working with all children, but especially for sensitive children when there is a high risk of them having, being afraid that they might drown in the depth of a feeling, of an emotion, right? So I think that it's been really powerful and helpful in working with sensitive kids in using that like metaphorical language to help them visualize their emotional experience and to remind them regularly that an emotion is a wave and it will move through you. Like it will always pass. It's not possible for a wave to stand still, right? It's the same with emotions. They move through you. And it's really helpful to always remind them that you cannot drown in a feeling. And when they're young, they're sort of borrowing your prefrontal cortex, right? They're using you as like an external hard drive to help them to withstand the depth of some of the emotions. And then as they get older, just perpetually partnering with them and how you can help them in those moments, and also reminding them that there's no emotion bigger than them. Like whatever the emotion they're feeling, they are big enough for it to move through them without knocking them over.
Yeah, and that's a really, really, really poignant visual. I love that. And I think it's also really important for us as parents to be mindful of making our words match our actions here. So, for example, if every time a child has a big emotional release, if we rush in and say, you're okay, don't cry, let me hold you, let's distract you, like let's get through this, let's make it stop as quickly as possible," we then are inadvertently sending our children the message that emotions are big and scary and that they should be either feared or stuffed down or repressed or something like that. What I have found works extremely well with sensitive children and for myself as a sensitive adult is to say something instead like, all of your feelings are safe here. Because not only is it a reminder for myself to make the child's feelings safe, which means I don't try to interrupt them. I co-regulate with the child. I stay with the child. If it's a child who appreciates touch, I might offer a hug or a lap or a rub on the back, whatever it may be. But if I say to the child, all of your feelings are safe here, I remind myself to keep those feelings sacred and in a safe place. But I'm also articulating to the child, you get to feel what you're feeling. And I'm standing by my word there. So I'm going to let you have the time and the space to process what you need to process. If I notice that you are particularly stuck or looping, I might offer a tool to get past the looping part of it, but that happens so infrequently that most of the time, just like the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, the shortest distance through emotions, particularly the hardest ones, is just to let them flow, let them process fully through to completion, keep them sacred and safe and allow for them. And that will help teach these sensitive kids that those feelings really are that wave that you discussed, that nobody's going to try to come in and stop by putting up a dam of some sort.
Yes, yes. I like to say be the lighthouse in your child's emotional storm. And even in those really hard moments when a child feels overwhelmed, you can ask. So one of some of the language that I use is like to connect with the light. So like even if you're in the midst of a really big storm, like you can always connect with the light, like the soft blanket that is in my hands, or the warmth from my mom sitting next to me, or like those from a therapeutic perspective, like that's really super helpful for anxiety. But really it carries over into any emotional storm, like regardless of what the feeling is. The more you can be the lighthouse in your child's emotional storm, like the more light they get to absorb, the more of that light becomes a part of who they are, and then they get to tap into it even when you're not there with them.
That's beautiful. I love that imagery.
All right, let's move into our Q&A. So I asked the Sage family community what questions they had about sensitive children, and Noelle wants to know how to help children who are sensitive to media, like movies, shows, and books, navigate that world and find things that appeal to them.
Great question. Okay, spoiler alert. Offer spoilers.
Yeah.
So, there are a few ways you can do this, particularly with younger kids, and we can talk about older kids in a second. But number one, know your child, know what they're sensitive to. So, for example, if your child is going through a phase of major separation anxiety from mama, don't show him Bambi. Bambi is not going to be a win here. Or pretty much anything Walt Disney ever touched, for the record. So if you have a child who has certain specific sensitivities, look ahead of time to see if that is going to be triggering to them as they watch this movie, read this book, whatever it may be. So preview as much as you can. Definitely don't be the first one on opening day to go and see that movie or read that book when it first comes out, or watch that show when you've never seen it before. Let others go first. Let the less sensitive ones watch it, tell you about it, write reviews on it, do your research on the internet, whatever it is. Find ways to learn what exactly is in this media, and is my child likely to be sensitive to it? Now, if there is something that your child is likely to be sensitive to, spoil it for them. You can talk to your child and say, this movie has a scene where, for example, somebody isn't nice to somebody else, but it does turn out okay at the end. Would you like me to tell you more detail? So I'll share a personal example because I think it's helpful sometimes to be able to visualize what this looks like in action. So my daughter, who is 7.5 right now, has never read the book. I think it's called How the Grinch Stole Christmas. That has been on her no-go list for a long time. She actually still watches very, very little TV, hardly any movies, and we're really intentional about the books that we choose for her because she's sensitive and she knows that she is. So when I showed her the cover of the Grinch book, she said, nope, he does not look like a nice character. I don't want to read it. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And for a couple of years, I let it go. I offered and she said no, so we left it and I didn't try to force it. Finally, this year, I pushed a little bit because I know enough of her and her development to say I think she's ready for it. So I said, what I would like to do is tell you the story of the Grinch and how it turns out. So before we read it, I'm going to tell you every detail that I can remember. And if you're comfortable with that, then I can read you the book. So that's what we did. And she was totally comfortable with what I described to her. And the whole way through reading the book, she knew it was going to turn out okay because I had already described the details to her. So There is no rule in any parenting book anywhere that says just because this new movie was released this year that you need to see it this year. Take your time, watch older stuff first, see what your kids resonate with, what they don't, and preview everything you possibly can ahead of time. That said, also, generally speaking, choose books before movies. So, for example, if there's something that's been made into a movie from a book, read the book first because that way it is less sensory input for the child to process all at once. There isn't going to be anything terribly unexpected. For example, there won't be a loud crashing noise. You're just going to be reading the words, there was a loud noise, and that's much less impactful to the nervous system than simply reading about it. I will caution you, there are some exceptions, especially if you are reading to a child. You may need to do some editing while you're reading. This does still require adult navigation. For example, I remembered the movie Mary Poppins and thought, that was a pretty sweet movie. I think my child's probably ready for it. I think there was a scene early on where Mr. Banks was kind of grouchy, but besides that, I don't remember anything too potentially offensive about it. I think we can do it, but let's read the book first just to be safe. Well, lo and behold, Mary Poppins, the original book written in the 1800s, is infinitely more macabre and dark than the Disney version that we all know and remember from our childhood. So that was I won't call it a mama fail on my part. It was a learning experience for me, and that I probably had to verbally edit 50% or more of that book because it never would have flown with my sensitive child. So the more we can do ahead of time to be proactive and spoil things for ourselves, spoil things for our child, the more we can ease our children in to what they are comfortable with and what they're not.
Did she know that you were editing the book?
Yeah, I'm really upfront with her because she can read well enough to know that I'm skipping words. So I will tell her, I'm going to edit this as I'm reading to make sure that it's appropriate for you. If you have questions about things, I will answer them. But that way she knows, okay, listen more than read, and it works for us. For older children, by now you have enough experience with them to really nail down what do they like, what don't they like, and do your research ahead of time to let children pick things that they feel comfortable watching. But there's nothing wrong with saying to a child, hey, do you remember the last time you watched that movie that was, I hesitate to even say it because I'm a sensitive person myself, but let's choose some horror movie or something. Remember last time you watched that horror movie? You didn't sleep for 14 months afterwards? Maybe we shouldn't do that again, but you're in charge of your body. So what do you think? What worked for you and what didn't about that? So invite your child into choosing things that work for them and respect who they are. Certainly, the more you embrace and allow for them to be their authentic selves while they're little, the more comfortable they'll be growing into their preteen and tween and teen years, being able to say to their friends, you know what? I know myself and I don't like horror movies, or I don't really like movies where there's a lot of bloodshed. That's not my thing. And I am going to skip that one, but I'll see the next one with you. And the more we have embraced who our child really is, the more he or she can embrace themselves to stand up for themselves and choose their media wisely as they grow up.
Yeah, I think the term I like for it is sensory layering. So that's how I think of it in terms of digesting content for sensitive kids. And it's a lot of what you described where you kind of introduce the story or the concept in layers. So it might first be like you did with the Grinch, just describing what's going to happen in the story at a very high basic level and a heavy focus on the happy ending. Then maybe you read the book. Then maybe you watch the movie, but the kid holds the remote and knows where the pause and the mute button are. Maybe you have no sound on for any of the scary parts, like the first time you watch it. So I think it can be helpful to think of it in terms of sensory layering. So you're layering on, like sort of working up to the full experience of a story. And the kid gets to sort of control the gas pedal and the brake pedal in terms of, or like the handles on the faucet, they get to kind of control how much and how fast it comes out. It's also okay to say no to things that don't add to your peace and joy. Like you were saying, like I don't watch horror movies. Like I am way too sensitive for them. I can't do it. I also can't read or watch like historical things that are based on really horrible and true events.
Yes. Yeah, there's no Hotel Rwanda for 8-year-olds.
Yeah, I can't do it. But I do want, there is definitely something to be said for partnering with your kid and helping them to navigate these experiences, because we don't need to force them to digest things that they are not ready for. I mean, the general like gentle parenting philosophy of, like they're not going to be too scared to watch the Grinch movie when they're 20. Like, eventually they'll get there. Like there's no hurry, there's no rush. Like that is definitely true. It's also true that like I would never want to learn about what happened during the Holocaust. You know what I mean? Like, or I would never want to learn what happened around slavery. And so it is, particularly as homeschooling families, it is like this, you have to like deeply know your kid, think in terms of a process of sensory layering and like on what level can they digest this without getting indigestion? You know what I mean? Like how much of this can I offer to them before how much of this can I offer to them in such a way that it adds value for them, it increases their understanding of the world, and it doesn't like hurt them and shut them down and create more problems for them. So it is a delicate balance. Just try starting off introducing things at a really high basic level, and then you can like layer in deeper and deeper from there as they feel ready, and just allow them to control the handles on those faucets.
Exactly. Yeah. And neurologically, if anybody ever needs to push back on somebody else who might be perhaps encouraging your child to watch something that they're not ready for, you can talk about mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are real things that exist in our brains, and they process experiences that are happening externally as if they were happening internally. And for sensitive children, mirror neurons are like basically on steroids. They are really going to feel as if what they're observing is happening to them. And it is a neurological, physiological reality for them. So it's a lot easier to push back once you have a little neuroscience in your pocket as well.
Yeah, and also, like I think you mentioned it earlier, it's a good opportunity to practice like holding your boundaries with calm confidence if people give you or your child a hard time about it. Sort of like practice in advance what you would say. Have a really simple sentence that you repeat, like, "Oh, we didn't enjoy that story." Something like that, because maybe you told them about the story and they decided they didn't want to watch the movie. That's a truthful statement, and it also kind of ends the conversation. So just kind of equipping your child with a way to have those conversations in such a way that is honest and authentic, and yet holds their boundaries and allows them to confidently stand up for what is in their best interest.
Exactly, yeah. And we never need to apologize for our sensitive child's sensitivity, no matter the topic, media or otherwise. Our kids are who they are designed to be, and what a gift they are. So stand up for them.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's move into our deep dive. So the show notes can be found at sagefamily.com/podcast55, where you can also subscribe and get show notes sent right to your inbox. So Sarah, what are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into the topic of sensitive children?
Sure, yeah. Well, like I said, I'm writing a couple of books right now, so a lot of the resources that I'm referencing are um, going to be in there. A lot of them are in my head and in neuroscience journals at the moment, but generally speaking, certainly shows like yours are fantastic. So didn't know you'd expect me to turn this around to back at you, but you're wonderful.
Well,
Uh,
thank you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. I certainly have some blog posts on this topic as well, and I offer coaching sessions and mini courses. I actually have a mini course for free on sensitive kids, actually a couple of them. You can choose one for free if you want from my website, and I will continue to make other resources available to you as I publish them.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today, Sarah. I know there are so many sensitive kids out there, so many kindred spirits with myself, and hopefully we're making the world a little bit better for them today by having this conversation for the world to hear.
You are a joy and a gift, Rachel. Thank you so much.